We don't have a PA system, so I don't want anybody to miss anything that's said by anybody, so to the extent that's possible, if we can concentrate on whoever happens to be speaking, whether it's me or somebody else, and try to control the background noise. That way nobody will have to shout and lose their voices. Thank you very much for coming. I don't usually do things like this, and I'm not doing it by myself, it's to some extent it's a new experience for me, but I very much enjoy being here, and I'm very pleased at everyone who's shown up. We have some people here that I'd like to introduce. We have Steve Shabbat, who's the alderman for this area. Steve, where are you? Over here. And we have Andrea Schott. Did I pronounce your name correctly? She's the older person for the area in which I live, further up the creek. I live in a little stone house on the creek with a steeple, like some of you may know that. And I've been in that house for about 12 or 13 years, and I absolutely love being here. And I've got some people who are part of what I loosely call our team. We've got Steve Ressler. Steve, you just raise your hand. Steve is a former, very, very talented official with the Department of State. He was like the go-to person for waterfront issues. And he was brought into Kingston by Mayor Sotile when we had an issue of how to regulate the inner channel of Island Dock, and he brought his expertise to bear on that, and it worked out very well. And we've got, let's see, who do we have over there? Is that Jim MacGyver? Okay, Jim MacGyver is an environmental engineer and a geologist, and I met him when I first came to Kingston about 13 or 14 years ago, and he had just done a major environmental assessment of the whole waterfront for the city of Kingston, and he's helped us out from time to time since then up to now. It's been a great resource. Who else do we have here? We have Chris Zell, and Chris Zell works for Bernier and Larios, and he's a very talented person when it comes to things having to do with land, and he's helped us out quite a bit, and you'll see some of his handiwork here. And then we have Brian Zweig, who's basically a real estate analyst. And who else are we looking for here as part of the team? Who am I missing here? Did I miss anybody? Daniel Windsor. Now, Daniel Windsor was involved in the generic environmental impact assessment, which was done here about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was done on a grant that was obtained by Steve Finkel when he was the head of the Economic Development Department. It was a 90% grant, and some of the property owners here put in the other 10%. And Daniel was the key man for that, and so he's now working as a consultant with us. He went on to a different company, but his expertise went with him, so we still tap into his expertise. Is there anybody that I've missed here who I should mention as part of? Please don't be bashful. Maybe I missed it.
Scott Childers just walked in.
Excuse me?
Rennie Scott Childers just walked in, another older person.
I can't hear you.
Rennie Scott Childers, alderman from Ward
3.
Okay. So, hello. Welcome. So, what? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, and last but not least is Daniel Syed. And Daniel's an ex-military guy who spent a lot of years analyzing land projects for the United States Army. And he's gone into private industry some years ago. He works with us as a consultant also. He's got a bunch of postgraduate degrees in real estate analysis and so forth. And he talks in a language that I can barely understand, but he tries to bring it down to my level now and then. And so that's so much for the introductions. First thing I'd like to mention is the question of the super garage. And we got a lot of pushback on that, the name and the rendering that was published and so forth. And so we've taken a very hard look at it, and really the kind of idea got away from us. And so this is an updated concept of what the super garage, which is no longer a super garage, will look like, more in keeping with the architecture of the community, smaller in scale and size. And we've reached out to the community to come up with suggestions for names, and those are still coming in. And one thing that I would like to mention in connection with a possible renaming of that project is that we have recently acquired the Cornell Steamboat Company Corporation and the trademark. So we can incorporate that if so desired in the name for that project. And since Cornell is a very historic name, you know, in the Rondout, you know, it's certainly worth keeping it alive as much as possible. And we're in the Cornell Steamboat Company building, but there are other things that could be Cornell too. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how we got from where we were 13 or 14 years ago to where we are now. Many of you know this story, but not everybody, and I don't mind telling the story again. I came up here, I guess it was around 2005, on a fireboat. The first view I had of the city of Kingston was from the water, and I saw all these tank farms and junkyards, and I was kind of shocked because I was basically a New York City guy. You know, I'm a Brooklyn guy, and New York City is full of waterfronts, and and it just seemed like the waterfront was being used for some really low purposes. And I kind of fell in love with the place. I mean, I really, I was just getting ready to retire. I'd done other things in my life, and I saw the Cornell Steamboat building, and I mean, we bought it in about 15 minutes. I mean, I just sold some properties down in Brooklyn, and I transferred the money up here. And I mean, my wife and I walked in here, and we did a quick cruise through. We were already in touch with the broker and the owner, and we scrolled out something on the back of a greasy envelope, and we were in. And it was just a love affair at first sight. And the same thing with the rest of the waterfront. And so we've been very lucky in our real estate investments in Brooklyn, which for me is still kind of a heady thing to understand. I come from a very modest background. My father punched a time clock. My mom was a homemaker. Of all the people in my family, and it was a large family at one time, I'm the first person that ever went to college. I'm the first person that ever flew in an airplane. And I might be the first person that ever bought a new car, although I only ever bought one. And we, other things that I did in my life having to do with antique motorcycles and, some public service jobs. Whenever we got a little money, we'd buy a building, and there were a lot of decrepit buildings in Brooklyn. And all of a sudden, they weren't decrepit anymore, and all of a sudden, they weren't cheap anymore. And so, without us really being particularly clever, we wound up with quite a good pot of cash. And so, about the time that we came up here, we had been selling off stuff. The market was at peak, and we just took all that money and transferred it up to Kingston. I have a fairly modest lifestyle. This is the way I walk around. I haven't bought a new suit in a couple of years. I'm real happy being just, this is a 10-year-old jacket. I just love being who I am. And the opportunity to do something in a place like Kingston that might make a difference was something that really important to me. I mean, my background includes social worker, Peace Corps volunteer, a probation officer in New Jersey, a probation officer in Brooklyn, assistant DA for 5 years in Brooklyn, a little work here and there with the Department of Justice. I enjoyed all my public service work. Uh, and I mean, all of a sudden, you know, I'm kind of retired, and I wasn't really going to, you know, everybody says I'm retired Brooklyn attorney. I retired at about 35 because I did other things. You know, I wasn't somebody who had an active law practice or anything like that, and didn't have a shingle outside. I did other things. And all of a sudden I was presented with this opportunity to, you know, as I got to know Kingston, of, gee, maybe I could really make a difference here, and maybe I got some leverage. It's just because, you know, these properties that I have down in Brooklyn are, you know, worth some money now, and it seemed like this waterfront was a real incredible opportunity because, you know, it was a beautiful thing, but it had, you know, junk cars and tanks on it and so forth, but they're not permanent. The only thing that's permanent is the water and the land. So, you know, my wife and I, we did a lot of talking, and we met a lot of people here. We met with the officials in the city. We made friends here, and we made a major investment. And we own about 100 acres in the city of Kingston, including everything from the Old Savannah Rib House out till you get your feet wet, and a marina, the house that I live in, a condo, some land up in the Dwyer properties and so forth. And our objective is to see good things happen with this land. We're not real estate developers. I'm called a real estate developer. Maybe I sound like a real estate developer. I don't see myself as a real estate developer. I see myself as a visionary and a facilitator to try to make things happen. And that's what I've been doing for 13 years. This is a full-time job for me to try to make this waterfront primarily into something that can turn around the economy of the city of Kingston. This waterfront is the key to revitalizing the economy of the region the way it was up until World War II. Because for more than 100 years before that, this was the economic engine of the region. We had 65 tugboats running out of Kingston. It was the largest tugboat fleet ever in America, anywhere. We manufactured bricks, and we did bluestone. We were a major conduit for agricultural goods and meats and so forth that were coming out of the Midwest through the Great Lakes and then down the Hudson River. It was a fabulous thing. But then, you know, the world changed, transportation changed. We had, you know, railroads brought things to the East Coast without having to go through the Great Lakes, trucks, everything, and then it declined. And so there we were, and then we had IBM, but then everybody knows the story of IBM. And you know, City Hall was a pigeon coop. And we've come a long way back since then. We've had some really good leaders here. We've had some really good innovative people in government and in the private sector here that have brought the city back a long way from where it was at its worst. And most of the people in this room can remember when it was at its worst. And we're much, much better off than we are today. But the question is, what's the real potential? Have we realized our potential as a city? And I think that the answer is, well, all the pieces are kind of coming together now, but we're not there yet. And the waterfront is the key. Because this stretch of waterfront, this 3/4 of a mile, it can do things which would energize the entire area, culturally, economically, water-dependent uses, housing, all sorts of things. And that's my main focus. I want to talk a little bit. We have a bit of a slideshow. All of the people on my team are going to be available to answer questions. I'm going to be available to answer questions. People who want to make comments, certainly that's true. But I just want to talk about a couple things before we start the slideshow. This is a diagram of the East Strand. We're here. That's where the Cornell building is. So if you reverse this, now this is just a way how we facilitate what might happen here. So there's a bulkhead that has to be replaced because our bulkhead is very old and it's deteriorating. there will be a waterfront walkway parallel to the bulkhead. There'll be a division of, which this is our concept, to divide this area up into 9 rectangles. And in between each rectangle, a wide walkway, maybe 40 feet wide. And if you can see those little lavender areas there, those are the walkways. The idea is that you would have multiple points where you could access the waterfront and the waterfront walkway and the docking and everything else that might be there from the East Strand without having to walk one way or the other. The combined area of the walkways and the traverses is 2.5 acres. And we propose that 2.5 acres be put in the public domain for everybody to use. It's a lot of land. We are working with the city and the state to get the bulkheads replaced. That's an active project now. We've already started the first segment of it. The Maritime Museum, Bob Burhans, I forgot to introduce you, Bob.
Okay.
Are working, and this is a serious project. We're almost done with the design aspect of it. The next cycle will fund the first section of the bulkhead, and the next cycle will also fund the design project for the remainder of the bulkhead. This is fabulous, fabulous news, because everything on the East Strand depends on a good bulkhead. Whatever we want to do here, we need the bulkhead, whether it's mooring vessels, whether it's putting up buildings that have a stable foundation, any kind of water-dependent uses. All of this requires bulkheads. Now, it's worth reminding everyone that where we stand was a marsh. The entire East Strand was a marsh. It looked the same as it does on the other side of the creek. And some really forward-thinking people that go back a couple of hundred years built what we have. The East Strand is a man-made creation. The bulkheads, all the landfill and so forth. But it requires periodic maintenance. And we're at that point now with the bulkheads. And for the first time, we can see light at the end of the tunnel. And it's a great thing. We're working very well with the city administration and with all the parties involved and a whole bunch of state agencies. It's coming together. That's about it for this segment. Daniel, do you want to?
Yes, I'll go over.
Slides? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rob. The only one correction, boss, I was in the Navy, I wasn't in the Army. All right?
Sorry.
But we're just going to go over the slides we prepared here. It's going to cover a little bit of history. Most folks here probably know this, but we're just going to cover it, just to go over the history of Kingston, the importance of the waterfront, and we'll go along and we'll discuss the project as well. So the only thing I'm going to ask is please hold any comments or anything like, or any questions until we're done. The only person allowed to jump in is Rob, because he's my boss and he can do that. And the rest is if you could just hold your comment and we'll do that afterwards. All right? So a little bit about the history of Kingston. Kingston, it goes back to 1600, 1614. It was, it was settled by the Dutch. All the way, and you can see, we put some of these pictures over here. You can see how useful can everyone see this? If you can't, you can move around a little bit closer if you like. And you can see the kind of, the use that was, the roundup was used for. Major, big ships. All the way until, Kingston in 1872 officially became a city.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Next slide. On the left side here, you have Mary Powell, known as the Queen of the Hudson, used to be right here in Kingston. And also you have SS Columbia. And these are, look at the size of these ships. These are major, you're talking 250 feet plus. These are major vessels, and this used to be part of the Kingston economy. And the one thing that makes Kingston interesting and very valuable to the, potential development of the economy is the deep port. It's the only deep port south of Albany, and you're only 90 miles away from New York City. So you're kind of right in the middle, and it's federally regulated channel. That means larger vessels can come in, they have come in, and you can see them even today. There are some pretty large vessels parked, and you can see major, tugboats pull in as well. Next slide, please. So what happened to the industry? What happened to the dependency on the water, water uses? Well, there were major disruptions. The use of railways obviously connected the region and made the use of waterways obsolete. And of course, the highways after World War II didn't help. And then, of course, the trucking industry as well. So all of that kind of took away the importance of the waterfront. And that's when you saw the decline into time after World War II. You saw a decline, a major decline in dependency on using the waterfront. Next slide. So I'm going to play a little bit of clip here for you guys. And this is what happened after, 1954. IBM moved in to Kingston.
Arrived in Kingston Valley in the war, actually, when President Roosevelt suggested strongly to Thomas Watson, the head of IBM, that the company get involved in the war effort. And Roosevelt also, we believe, put pressure on people to locate in the Hudson Valley, where he was from. Accordingly, Mr. Watson opened up a factory building in Poughkeepsie to make armaments, rifles, and other things. And they expanded to other buildings. And then they continued to expand, and they started opening these research laboratories around Poughkeepsie. And we believe that these research laboratories led to them to say, let's keep on going and to go across the river to Kingston. We also feel that this was part of a whole effort during this period to move out of cities, what one scholar calls pastoral capitalism. The feeling was that our enemies would first strike cities, and best to move outside of cities to other locations. But it was also a time when they wanted to have horizontal manufacturing. In fact, if you look here, it was the Boyce Farm. And it was, at first, two things. They worked on the Sage air defense system, and they made electric typewriters. And there's the assembly line for electric typewriters with women at the final testing phase. And so here you see that another big event for IBM Kingston, first executive electric typewriter rolls from assembly line. While this was going on, the Sage system was also going on. It was an air defense system for the country. And then Kingston was the site for mainframes, for the System 360, which was the most famous mainframe. It was a big for the economy. And so here you see this gentleman is working at his terminal on the testing floor. And there were these systems engineers that would go out and work with the companies that had purchased them. And after they would test them, the trucks would line up to take them away. And why Kingston was so attractive was access to the thruway. And this is about the people, affected. And people felt in the best years of IBM extremely well treated. People talk about there's a man named John DeJoy, and John started on the assembly line in 1955. And he kept on rising up in the company, and as the company was expanding and constructing new plants, let's say in Japan, he would be sent, to Japan. So here you see this is a telethon for United Way. This is Don McIsaac, who is the director of communications, who happened to bring a friend along to the telethon, Bobby Kennedy. And this tells another story of what was going on in Kingston during the 50s and 60s. This is about this era of urban renewal. So much industry had left Kingston, and Rondout was the center of that industry, and Rondout was doing very badly. So that era was about, well, just get rid of it, demolish it, and start over. And this affected the African American community very deeply because a lot of those folks were living in rundown. And so this is about what happened to the neighborhoods. You know, Kingston didn't have suburbs. In 1950, 90% of the buildings in Kingston were built before 1930. So this is what Wall Street, what shopping was like. This is what Wall Street looked like in its heyday. This is mid-60s. So this kind of gives you the sense of the last days. And I walked into an office in the plant recently, and I saw this whiteboard. Someone had taken the letters, and I don't know.
Right. So we saw what happened after IBM left. You know, this area, Kingston, used to be center of technology, center of innovation. And right after, you know, but unfortunately, because they depended on one industry at the time, once they left, it devastated the economy and left a lot of places abandoned. People left Kingston, and then you were left with you know, infrastructure that was basically deteriorated, with the, you know, bulkheads being one, and of course you connect the long time period that it wasn't used, and that was left in a dismal shape. And then of course in Kingston you had metal factory, you know, metal recycling factories, all tank farms, and other abandoned factories left over because, you know, economy was in a pretty bad shape. So what was the city doing? It's interesting. In 1992, 1992 is when the city got together and they wanted to come up with a plan of revitalizing Kingston. So that's when they basically created a program. And that program was later solidified into a local waterfront development implementation plan in 2002, again reconfirmed in 2005. So, you know, city realizing that this is about to happen, this, you know, these, you know, the economy is on a downslope, started creating these incentives for people to come in and develop Kingston and reimagine it.
And the foundation that was laid during the late 1990s and into the early 20s, has created the opportunities that are here now. Because the whole idea of revitalizing the waterfront, recognizing that the waterfront would play a major role in revitalizing the economy of Kingston, culturally, water-dependent housing, many other areas. That's where this recognition came from, and it came from the city administration of Kingston. A lot of people have played a role in it. Some of these people are still active, and that program continues until today. The current administration of the city is continuing with the very same program. You know,
So
administrations come and go, but the program has been a constant, and that's very much to the credit of the city administration of Kingston. And it's, for a city of this size, the administration and the talent that exists within that administration is really quite remarkable.
So another thing, part of this program is you're kind of solidifying, and you're the plan, and the city, once they agree on this program, they have resources available to them that are outside of the city. So basically it's an agreement with other government. You're talking about a state government, you're talking about a federal government, to be able to have access to those funds to be able to develop along that same vision. As long as you don't deviate from that same vision, you have access to more funds on the state and federal level as well.
And there's something significant there, Daniel. A few years ago, Governor Cuomo reorganized the whole process of applying for grants. There are a whole bundle of grants in the state of New York that are available to municipalities. But before it was reorganized, it was a hodgepodge. Well, Governor Cuomo created the consolidated funding process. And so municipalities can apply to one central location for any of the projects that they're seeking funding for. And then that central location evaluates the applications, and then they refer them out to the appropriate agencies that have the expertise and the funding for each specific project. And it really does work. And the city has gotten a lot of money from this program already. I think, what was it, just last year, we got 10 million bucks, and you know, there are other things that are in the hopper now. And it's a total logical reorganization of the process where state government can fund projects at the local level. And we are beneficiaries of that as well. The design project that's going on now for the first stage of the waterfront is funded by that project. And the rest of the waterfront will be funded largely from that project in one way or another.
So this is a little bit from the local waterfront development implementation plan. I just want to draw your attention to the type of development the city has created and has agreed upon. And again, this is going back to 1992 to currently. This is inside the local waterfront development implementation plan, where it mandates the development of 106,000 square feet of retail, community-based retail with local food market and other businesses as well. So kind of sort of like a mixed-use development. And we have, along with new developments, important to remember, unlike what happened in the 50s and 60s when basically people tore it down, we're also looking at reuse. And one of the examples you can see on the left side of the screen, you have Dumbo. Basic, you know, if you guys been to Brooklyn, you've seen what happened in Dumbo. People are reusing those same spaces and recreating them, repurposing them, and that's where you have. So what we're looking at is also trying to reuse the current spaces and to fit the current needs. Next. So this is when, basically Rob touched on this a little bit. You know, when Rob came here, and Rob, if you want to speak to the...
Hey, most of the people in this room remember when all along here, just south of this building or east of this building, it was junkyards and tank farms. And they've been here for a long time. They were certainly here when I got here. We got rid of them. That was the first visible thing that we did as an organization. There's a lot of community support for it. And within a matter of, I guess it was, 2 or 3 years, all the junkyards were gone, all the sheet metal fences were gone. For the first time in a generation, people could actually see the Rondout Creek from the East Strand. Not long after that, we got rid of all the tanks, and we started environmental investigation of the land, and some of the land had some levels of contamination on it, others didn't. None of it was terrible. There was nothing that glowed in the dark. We were very fortunate for that. Just low level petroleum type contamination, which is was being flushed out by the tides. And so we interfaced with the Department of Environmental Conservation, and they blessed our remediation programs. And I mean, what would that happen to in a period of, I don't know, 5 or 6 years? It was a tremendous thing. I mean, look, I mean, I'm a guy that just used to, renovate brownstones in Brooklyn. Here I am working on a waterfront, and it worked. Much to my amazement, maybe the amazement of some other people too, but all of a sudden, the waterfront was transformed into something that people could actually see and imagine that it would, it would get better, that things would come back. We always got a lot of support from the city in doing this, and from other quarters as well. And that support continues, and we're very grateful for it.
And I know the Alderman, Ms. Shabbat, if you want to, just kind of confirm what Rob is talking about. I know you've been here for a long time, to kind of just to give people a first-hand account of what used to be.
Yeah. I'm going to leave it to your imagination how long I've been here, but I've been here my whole life. And we got a couple gentlemen in the audience that have been here too. Chucky Polacco and his wife have been here, Vinny Rule. We all played Little League together right up the road from here. I live right across the street, used to be Hasbrook Avenue. came down. I lived right up the road from there. Downtown was really, to us, it was a magical place. We could walk down here, get out of your little neighborhood into, you know, a whole different world when you got down there. There were businesses, our relatives worked down here, my grandfather worked here, my other grandfather was a bank guard at the Rondout Savings Bank up the hill here. We got long family ties down here. I moved into my current house in '76. We've been in the same house since then. We love it down here. Sometimes we talk about moving, but we like it so much we want to stay here. We like everybody here. It's a great, great community. But I've always had this vision that downtown is going to bounce back. Is it going to be what it was when we were kids? Probably not. I think it's a whole different world. You know, downtown was actually kind of the hub of the community. Everybody came down here to shop and meet, and you know, there were bars down here. People came down here to eat and drink. You know, it was a whole different world. I don't know that we're going to get back to that. You know, but it can be. I would like to see it at least come back. So it's really going to look nice when people come here. They're going to say, "Wow, this is really good." And if Rob does nothing else, I'm grateful that he cleaned up the scrap metal yard. As he said, now I can't remember the last time you could see the creek driving along the Strand. That stuff has been there so long. So now it's at least nice when you ride down the street, you can see the waterfront. So now Rob is proposing something. You know, since Rob first shared this with me, it's already changed. It's you know, this is probably not the final product, so you know we can talk about.
We're definitely gonna discuss this
Yeah.
right now. I know when you're leading
We can
up
talk
to.
about our likes and dislikes, but I think this is going to change, you know, as we go along down the line. But you know, I think what we want to do is look at projects like this and you know not rush to judgment on. You know, let's you know take a fair look. I think we need a combination of old and new, as we do throughout the city. It's a very tough balancing act right now. And I love the history of the city, but you know sometimes you have to combine the two. When I was growing up, and you know when we were growing up down here, it was a really big mix of residential with a business right next door. I mean, you know, at the risk of sounding like a little rascal, we actually had a blacksmith shop like a block away from my house. We had a scrap metal yard 2 blocks from my house. We had all kinds of stuff down here, but it was a real neighborhood. You know, and I would like to, you know, kind of capture that feel again. And you know, when we moved in '76, it's been, you know, a real series of starts and stops down here. You know, things would start, they would kind of go away, come back again. And then we started seeing like real change, like the Maritime. I mean, that's one of the best things to happen down here so far, the Trolley Museum. We have some world-class restaurants in here now. You know, it's become a destination. And I guess that'll be the difference between now and when I was growing up. Downtown was not a destination except for us that lived here. You know, we would make this our destiny, but people wouldn't come from, you know, anywhere else to see this. Now we got an opportunity for people to come from all over the world to see this. And you know, my wife and I travel a lot. We have seen a lot of river walks, whatever you choose to call them. And we always go to them. Every time we see one, we stop and we go. And every time I say, what do they have to offer that we don't? And every time I said, you know, we have that. We just have to work at it a little bit. You know, so, you know, I thank Rob for being here, sharing this with everybody. You know, and Rob will appreciate feedback. And I know there's a big prize for whoever comes up with the new name, right?
Absolutely. Internet ship to shore.
Yeah. And that's it for me. That's it for the old timer.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Let's continue here.
So here, Kingston Renaissance.
I'm going to take over here.
Sure, go ahead.
sold one. The driving force behind what used to be the super garage, which is now the no-name building, but which will have a name at some point, was to restore PT boats and operate them. Now, in New Orleans, there's a museum called the Museum of the Pacific War. They have 2 PT boats, one of them is operational. They have the second highest attendance of any museum of any type in the United States, second only to the Smithsonian. It's a major potential draw. We have 4 PT boats that we acquired at various places in the United States and dragged them here into Kingston. 2 of them have very major military history during World War II. One of them was in JFK Squadron and actually rescued PT-109 when it was sinking. The other one was used during D-Day landings in Europe. Part of the project with that building is to restore these PT boats as a public attraction and to operate them as a public attraction and to use the museum as a destination. This is something where everybody wins and nobody loses, I don't think. We've already set up a not-for-profit association to facilitate the restoration of these boats, and we'll shortly be putting in an application for the museum structure as well, which will also be a not-for-profit. This is one of the boats that we used to run here, we sold it to a museum in the Midwest. We continue. All right, this is just another rendering of what we have up there. And again, I want to emphasize that the concept behind this is to create a framework where end users can come in, where once we get the infrastructure in, the bulkheads, the walkways, the sidewalks, and so forth, at that point, we have people who want to use this property either as buyers or as long-term lessees. And since, for better or for worse, we own the whole thing, we can decide who comes in and whether they fit a good, healthy mix. So that they're compatible with each other, and so the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, hopefully when we're done. We were already talking to Van Meegen Group in Holland, and they operate 27 tour vessels, large tour vessels in Europe. They've sent their people over here to evaluate this area, and they want to base an operation here and build vessels in the United States, which creates jobs, and operate the vessels here, which create jobs, and the whole process will stimulate the economy. We're already in discussions with a well-known hotel company who's done some stuff locally. You would recognize the name, to put up a hotel down here. There are restaurants that want to come in, all sorts of things. And so this is a classic case of build it and they will come. If we can create the infrastructure, then finding really healthy end users for each piece of land is almost a foregone conclusion. Well, that's what used to be the super garage. So we kind of drove a stake through the heart of that one. And Paul Jankowitz drew these, and this shows the concept of the new building with a couple of PT boats inside being restored. And these are just some names that have come up. Cornell, Bluestone, Steamboat Building, and so forth. And anybody that's got an idea for a name, you know how to reach us, and they'll all be considered. That's it.
Thank you.
This is a real thrill for me. I'm not a guy that wants to lay off people anyway, so, I can't think of anything better that I want to do with my life than being right here in the city of Kingston. I love the city. I love being here. I live between here and Brooklyn, but this is where my passionate time is. I'm having the best time of my life just being here. I thank you all for being part of this. I'm going to open this up to questions and comments. We have, our team is here. Feel free to ask anybody or make any comment or ask any questions. I already see a couple of hands coming up here. And you can ask them me, or you can designate any of the other people that you want to ask questions to also. Mr. Connor. So one of the first people I met when I came to Kingston.
My name is Dennis Connors. I was like respiratory problem. I'm going to sit down. My family and I moved here 45 years ago. When we first moved here, every building on the street was abandoned. And we come down here at night. I'm really proud to know Mr. Iannucci, and I'm proud of what he did. 50 years ago, Richard Nixon signed the Clean Water Act. 50 years ago. Because it was a very serious problem with the water in the United States. I do a lot of reading. I still read around our creek. Don't drink the water. Don't eat the fish. Do not swim in around that creek. There's over 20 very poisonous chemicals that are in a car in a junkyard. They're deadly. Because of him, these two junkyards are gone. Those chemicals that were going into the Roundup Creek, they're not there anymore. I've heard a lot of people over the last 15 years say different things about Mr. Iannucci. But I'm still very proud of the work that he did. And I'm not that excited about the work that the government did. I really think it takes individual businessmen, entrepreneurs to get something done, especially when it comes to the environment. I was born in Binghamton, New York. I spent my whole childhood fishing. I lived where the Shenango River flowed into the Susquehanna River, the most beautiful rivers in the country. So when I moved here, I wanted to live by a river. And I've been there, myself and my family. But it's a great place, and I'm really proud of what we have done up to this point. And it's not easy to do this, because there's always somebody that has another idea. But I'm really happy that the person is coming. Thank you.
Dennis is a Vietnam veteran, paid a heavy price for his service, still with us.
Actions are stronger than words, and you did some action. I also was a trolley volunteer driver for 2 years. I drove that trolley. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question about your bulkhead work. The last two hurricanes, we had flooding all across here. The Maritime Museum was flooded out. Will that fix some of it, most of it, or all of it in the event of another flood from a hurricane or your development along here?
It depends on what the "it" is. We are in a floodplain. We have global warming. We have rising sea levels. This is a part of the reality that the entire planet is dealing with now. It would be nice if our national leaders were maybe a little bit more enlightened than they are. Hope springs eternal in that regard, but we're not going to reverse the process. We're going to have to cope with it. And that's a challenge for the entire world. How it affects us down here is that we're not going to keep the water off the land. When we have a flood event, the water will come on. So how do we deal with that? We build secure bulkheads that won't get damaged by flooding. The buildings that are put up essentially are stilted buildings that don't look like stilted buildings because they have blow-away panels in them. So when a flood comes in, and we will get more floods over the years, we construct these buildings so that the systems are on the second floor, so your heating system and all your other systems, your electrical systems are above ground level. And on the ground level, they look like normal buildings, but they have blow-away panels in them. It's a matter of survivability of the flooding. We're not going to keep the flooding out. But the nature of the bulkheads is important also, because we want to have bulkheads and a waterfront where when we do have a flood, when the water goes away, we still have an intact environment. Did I answer your question?
Makes me wonder, the guy that's going to put in more apartments across here on the green area, and if we remember the last hurricane, it flooded all the way across into the apartments, which are another, what, 400 meters? Is he going to be building, do you know, the same kind of concept as yours, so his downstairs will allow for flooding?
Well, the little bit that I know about the project, which really is very little, is that it will be commercial on the ground floor and residential above the ground floor. And there was a back and forth between the planning department and the developer to raise the elevation of the building. I don't know how much they raised it, but it certainly is higher than what they originally proposed. And, you know, Sue Cahill, are you here tonight?
Chuck Palaco's here.
What's that?
Chuck Palaco's here
Who?
from the planning board.
Okay. We have a really good planning board here. I mean, look, the planning board is always like, I mean, people like to beat up on the planning board. We've had Sue Cahill here since before I was here. There's some really smart people there. It's one of the things that I take some comfort with, and that is you actually can have intelligent conversations with people in the planning department. And I know that they were instrumental in raising the elevation of that building before they gave a final approval to it. That's all I know about it.
So it sounds like you changed the project from what was originally proposed and presented last month at the planning board. And we see a facade that's changed, but you haven't told us about what the design changes are. Is that what this meeting is about? Are you going to tell us about what the building is going to do and what the scope of the project is? You were talking about the bulkhead, which I don't think you're responsible. This isn't part of your project. You're talking with the state, but are you actually going to change the bulkheads, or I know you're going to, it sounds like you're going to put in the walkway. Can you just talk about the project?
Sure. Well, it's really two separate things. With regard to the no-name building, that's a building that we intend to build ourselves. And it will be built in segments. And it is intended to serve a variety of different purposes and meet a variety of different needs along the waterfront. At its core would be a restoration shop for the PT boats, which we have acquired and which are here right around us now, the 4 PT boats. Surrounding that will be public parking inside the building. Some commercial on the ground floor in the front, and some apartments. And it will be built 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Its usefulness is very much tied into the development of the waterfront. Because as we develop the waterfront, we're going to need parking, we're going to need other services. And as the development of the waterfront progresses, the size of the building will progress. So we build it, Paul Jankowitz isn't here at the moment, but his plan is to build it like 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. It is designed to be a multi-use, multi-purpose, multi-needs building. Now, have I answered your question as
Well,
far
I'm
as the
wondering
building?
how it's different from what you presented before. Has it changed, or is it pretty
Well,
much the
it's
same?
what
Is that 1/3 of it?
What's that?
Is that 1/3 of
Well,
it?
it just shows the front, okay? So you would build the first section in the front, and you would add on a middle, and then you would add on a back or a rear. What's changed is that the original concept was a kind of a fanciful thing where I sat down with the architect and we started drawing a bunch of things on a piece of paper, and we wound up with this really spectacular thing, which was way over the top of this location. And then it wound up getting published. This is a much more realistic approach. The architecture is more in keeping with the historical buildings in Kingston, and it's a smaller concept.
So what did you take away?
Excuse me?
What did you take away? You just made the whole thing smaller?
Yes.
Is there still like an ice skating rink and a swimming pool?
There's no reason why we can't do that.
Okay.
Because that's a 4-acre site. It's a really big site. And, you know, even if you reduce the size of the building by half, you'd still have room for a lot of stuff on the roof. And I can see that happening eventually. And, I mean, something like a skating rink on the roof with a view across the Hudson River would just be a spectacular thing. I mean, it would be a destination. People from all over the region would come there. Now, I see some other hands, but I don't think I fully answered your question about the waterfront.
Yeah, are you saying you're gonna put in bulkhead?
No, what I'm saying is that the bulkheads are a governmental responsibility. The same way that roads are, sidewalks, street lamps, walkways along, and so forth. And my role in that is the same as the role of many other people in the city of Kingston, and that is to participate in the design process, recommend designs, and to work with the city administration, with other stakeholders, including the Maritime Museum. We've got Bob Burhans here from the museum, other people in the area, and other interested parties, so that the bulkheads that are built, which will be built with government funds, are intelligently designed so that they can bring us forward.
And last question, is that true of the walkway as well? You're gonna work, like, you're not building the walkway, but you're gonna participate in the design process?
The walkway is part of the overall local waterfront development implementation plan. That from the time that plan was enacted in 2002, it has always been part of the process that as we rebuild the bulkhead, there will be a walkway, and that the walkway will be public. What we added to that was the concept of the 7 traverses, which will be about 40 feet wide, and that's a lot of area, so that we can enter and leave at various points, and at the same time it divides up the walkway into usable rectangular sizes so that we can bring in a variety of different end users. But you gotta understand, this is pretty heavy stuff for me, you know. I still remember painting apartments in downtown Brooklyn, you know. I'm way over my head on this thing, but I'm having a great time.
Yeah, I mean, I thought with your team that there was like a
Well,
design.
they're all smarter than me.
My question has to do with the scale of the project. You say you've shrunk the size of the building from what was originally proposed. Why does it have to be, since it's a multi-purpose structure, why does it have to be a single monolith at all, and why can't it be more like a campus? It seems that would be more appropriate to the area. Is that completely out of the question? Is it a matter of finances, costs?
No, it's just, at this time, it's just a concept. And we're open to discussion, we're open to whatever the general public sees this project developing as.
So a campus-like approach is not out of the question?
No, it is not.
Bear in mind that what we're doing here is conceptual, primarily in nature. We're a long way from any kind of concrete plans. We're moving in that direction, but we're certainly not there yet. Not even with regard to the no-name building, and certainly not with regard to the waterfront, except that the waterfront, our idea is pretty well gelled with regard to creating a framework, a structure, which would permit end users to come in.